whether that human being has faith in God or whether he is indifferent to God, God is at work in every human being's life.
Okay.
God can work involuntarily in your life, or God can work voluntarily in your life. You can be a part of God's plan, or God can literally put you in his plan, and he can do that without your permission. God does not have to check with you to do anything. I wanted to introduce you to the God of the Bible, who is sovereign and omnipotent, a God who is immutable, who does not change. But I want to focus a little bit more now on the activities of God, how God chooses to work with his creation and to work in his creation to carry out his will and his plans. And my brothers and sisters, I really want you to get this, that God has a plan for your life. God has a specific plan for your life. And I really wanted to talk about this from the God perspective, that God is the one who has chosen to save you. God is the one who's chosen to create you. And because of his choice to create you and his choice to use you, it is God's initiative to lay out the plans for your life. And my brothers and sisters, if I had time, I'd explain to you that it is God's choice and it is of God's choosing. God chooses to use whoever he wants to use. And sometimes we have to really grasp the concept from God's perspective. And see, I tell you what we do sometimes, we humanize God. We make God human, but he's not human. He is God. He is a spirit. And God does not allow any human limitations to limit what he does in the life of those who he creates and who he decides to use. Now, this sermon is going to be of interesting significance in your life because some of us are looking over our lives and looking at our lives and looking in our lives, and we really have not yet, even though we've been in the church a long time and been saved a long time, we really don't know what our purpose is.
Right.
We are walking around and have not discovered what our purpose is. But I hope through this sermon you can see that God has a plan specifically for your life. Now, this book of Jeremiah is a broad book because it is about judgment. It is about the Babylonians coming in and literally taking over the city of Judah. And it is Jeremiah going as a priest and a prophet to warn them of the impending judgment. Jeremiah, many scholars believe, is an 11th hour prophet. It was right before the 12 o'clock hour of the judgment of God that Jeremiah was commissioned by God to go to the people of God to warn them that the judgment was coming. Really, the only verse that we are familiar with, especially in this age, is Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. I know my thoughts that I have for you. And God says in that particular text, my plans were laid out, and I'm not through using you. And don't ever read that Jeremiah chapter 29 text and believe that God is finished. But God is saying, after this judgment, after 70 years, even though you have took me through something, you have rejected me, I'm still going to use you after this is over. Right. And I really wanted to say that to say this. Don't ever think it's too late for God to use you. Just because you rebel against God, just because you walk away from God, just because you decide to live a rebellious and disobedient life, it is never too late for God to use you. Sometimes you can go down a road that God didn't plan for you, that you didn't even plan for yourself, but it does not mean that God is finished with you. You can go through some things in life and the hand of God still be on your life. And my brothers and sisters, as I was sharing in Bible study on Wednesday night, let me give you this. And I've said this many times from this pulpit. Don't be too concerned about God putting his hands on you. Be concerned about him taking his hands off of you. Because once God takes his hands off of you, you're in trouble. And you said to me, Pastor, give me some proof. You remember it was Saul who was the first king of Israel. And in that Samuel text, what it says, in the hands of the Lord were taken off of Saul. It literally says in that text in the Hebrew that the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. And what you know about that story is that when the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, when God took his hands off of Saul, Saul started doing some crazy things. Instead of seeking the Lord, he went to a witch. Instead of seeking the Lord, he had lust and envy in his heart toward a man to whom God has put his hands on. He started harassing the anointed one of God. When God takes his hands off of you, my brothers and sisters, you'll do anything. You'll do some satanic things. You'll do some undermining things, and you will always have in your crosshairs the one whom God had anointed. Because God had taken his hands off of Saul. So don't be overly concerned about God putting his hands on you, because if he's putting his hands on you, the Bible says that whom the Lord loveth, he chastises. And he chastens. That literally means you are still a child of God. But when he takes his hands off of you, it could be an indication that you've gone too far. You strayed too far. You have so much rebellion and disobedience in your heart. You want to do things your way because you remember what got Saul in trouble was God told him to do one thing, but Saul said, I'm going to do it my own way. The Lord said, destroy. Saul said, I'm going to kill. And then he's going to try to stand in the office of a priest when he's the king. He tried to do what God didn't call him to do. And God gets to a point where God has had enough. And then he takes his hands off of you. And really, I don't have time to digress and really explain this to you, but God will let you keep the position, but will give you no power. Because he didn't fire Saul as king, he just didn't give him no power to be king. Because you can have the position but not have the power. And if you have the position and don't have the power, you can be very ineffective. My brothers and sisters, you better hear me. In other words, you can still be in a good-looking position but have no power to implement the power to be effective in that position. It's just like a person who have a whole lot of money but don't know what to do with the money that they have. They don't know how to use it for good. In other words, you can be in that position of power because Saul was still king. He still had the kingdom in his hand. He still had the command of the people, but he was ineffective at leading God's people. But the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. So I'm trying to explain to you and give you a good understanding that you can be a Christian. You can be a member of the church. You can be a saint on your way to heaven, but still God cannot use you because he has not put his hands on you, but he's taken his hands off of you. Because of your decisions. So I want to look at this text because Jeremiah is going to be a great example for us. I don't want you to look as much at this text at Jeremiah, but I want you to focus on God. Because Jeremiah is just a created creature that God chooses to use. Now, because I'm trying to get you to see God in every text. And so many times we look at the characters in the Bible, but we never look at the God who is controlling and using the characters in the Bible. And I want you to look at what God considers when he causes Jeremiah. And as he uses Jeremiah, I want you to see what God is doing. The activities of God in the life of this man, Jeremiah. You can think, my brothers and sisters, that it's all about you, but I can tell you it's all about God. You can think that everything that goes on spiritually in your life, especially as it relates to a Christian, and especially as it relates to a member of the church, you can think it's about you, but my brothers and sisters, it's really about God. God is intentional. God is focused in what he is going to do in your life. But I really want to tell you, God has a plan for your life. He has a specific plan for your life. He is ordering your steps. Now, I really got to pause parenthetically here and tell you that sometimes God's power, God's plan, and God's purpose overrides your free will. You can do what you want to, when you want to, and how you want to, but sometimes God will have the last say-so in that deliberation. I can tell you God will give you the free will to choose him, to serve him, to go where he told you to go, to do what he told you to do, and God will give you that free will. And God does that because free will is necessary so you can be a free moral agent. But don't think, my brothers and sisters, that your free will can override the wills and the sovereign will of God. Well, you said, Pastor, I really don't understand that. Well, let me explain this to you. Jonah, come here, go down to Nineveh and preach. That's free will. God did not make him go, but God told him to go. But then God created circumstances that got him where he told him to go in the first place. You can get there either the easy way or the hard way, but either way, you're going to get there. And see, what you don't understand, God will allow you to have free will, but it's not going to override the sovereign will of God. You're not going to win when you fight against God. The old people put it like this: your hands are too small to box with God. God is going to win. He will let you have free will, but if it goes against his sovereign will, God is always going to win. And if you want a good example of submitting to the sovereign will of God, look at Jesus Christ. When he was in the garden, he said, nevertheless, let thy will be done. He said, let this cup pass from me. God gave Jesus the choice to take the cup, and Jesus wanted not to drink what was in the cup, but he eventually submitted to the sovereign will of God. Some things are necessary. That's sovereign will. You have choice, but sovereign will always win over your will. All right. I'm trying to paint a picture for you, because you need to understand that God is always going to win. If God has a plan, God has a purpose, God has a destiny for your life, he's going to get you there one way or the other. Yeah. And sometimes when God can't get you to do right, he will affect all of the conditions and the circumstances that is surrounding your life, and he will use them to get you where he's trying to take you. And some of y'all might be wondering why you're going through what you're going through. Is God in your circumstances, God in your situation, trying to get you to go down a specific path. Yeah. You keep on fighting, you keep on rebelling, but he's going to get you there one way or the other. Yeah. He might not be able to change you, but he'll change every circumstance around you. He might not be able to break you, but he'll break down every situation that is around you. He might not be able to get you to turn, but he will turn every situation in your life against you to get you to go where he's trying to take you. You don't understand that you will lose so God can win. And listen, he's going to get you where he's trying to take you. You can get there the easy way, or you can get there the hard way. You can get there by just going down and buying a ticket to Nineveh, or you can go down and buy a ticket to Joppa, and God then can create a storm in your life and make you be the cause of that storm, and he will have you thrown overboard. You'll spend 3 days in a big fish's mouth, and he will spit you up on the beach in order to get you where he's trying to take you. You're going to get there one way or the other. Why? Because God has a plan. And he's going to get you there one way or the other. Now let me read the text. That's just the introduction. That's just the introduction, because I want to read this text, and I'm going to give you about 4 or 5 things, not about Jeremiah per se, but about God. Because really, when you know who God is, when you know how God works, you'll better understand your life. And see, what you're trying to do, if you read that Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11 text, he says, I know my thoughts. And see, that's the problem. You're trying to understand your life based on your thoughts, using your logic. But Isaiah says, our thoughts are not his thoughts, neither are our ways his ways. As far as the heavens are from the earth, his thoughts and his ways are separated from our thoughts and our ways. You'll never understand the purpose, the plan, and the destiny for your life trying to understand it with your mind, your thoughts, and with your ways. You have to look at it from a God perspective. You got to look up and understand God before you can ever understand where God is trying to take you. And it'll be confusing to you sometimes. But God is at work. Reverend Dr. Caskell preached a sermon at the Watson Grove Baptist Church during the conviction. And it's one of my favorite sermons I've ever heard. And what he preached about was God is going somewhere. And the question is, are you going with God? But God is going somewhere. He wants to go somewhere in your life and through your life and with your life to take you to his place of purpose, his place of destiny, so that he can work his plan through your life. So let me just read this one verse, and then I'm going to give you several points and look at Jeremiah. But don't look too closely at Jeremiah. Look at God, because Jeremiah is an infinite human being who has human limitations. He can only do so much. But what God's going to do, he's going to empower and enable, and he's going to use him. Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5 says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. You may be seated. I do want you to understand that plural nations, not only to Judah, but to the nations surrounding Judah, because he had an assignment to go to the nation to warn them about impending judgment, but the nations around Judah had been harassing Judah, and God says, not only am I going to judge you because of your disobedience, but I'm going to judge those nations around you for always giving you a hard time, because I have a specific plan for you, Judah. And those who are around you have been harassing you and bothering you, and I'm going to bring judgment on them as well. And I want you to understand what God is saying to Jeremiah. This is a powerful verse, because it is a powerful verse because it is God at work. Now, I need you to get that one statement. If I had a thesis statement, that would be the thesis statement that I would literally use, and that is that God is at work in the life of Jeremiah. And that's not a statement you need to take lightly. When I say that God is at work in the life of Jeremiah, you need to take that statement very seriously, because it is not Jeremiah at work in Jeremiah's life. In other words, Jeremiah does not call himself, Jeremiah does not use himself, but it is God who calls and God who uses him. You cannot be on an assignment because you want to be on an assignment. You have to be on an assignment because God has called you to be on an assignment. And that's the thing that I want you to get, that it is God who's doing the calling, it's the God who's doing the using. God is calling Jeremiah and God is using Jeremiah. And I really need to talk about the call of Jeremiah. Jeremiah didn't choose God, but God chose Jeremiah. And I need to tell you, my brothers and sisters, you can't choose to be called. You have to be called by God's choosing. He chooses who he wants to choose. He decides who is qualified to be used. And one of the commentators in this particular text says that it's very interesting that God did not go to the halls of academia and scholarship and privilege and religion and spirituality to find people to use, but sometimes God used very simple, uneducated, very common people. And see, that might be the problem. You might be too high to be used by God. God don't have to look high to find people to use. Sometimes he looks low. Sometimes he does not go to Wall Street, but he goes to Skid Row. Sometimes God does not go to to the high places in order to find people to use, but sometimes it is the most common people who we would never consider and use and consider to be great. Those are the people that God chooses. Yeah. Not people who are the Aristotles, the Platos, the Leonardo da Vinci's, the great people who have contributed great to science, art, and all of this philosophy, but God uses common people. I really want to say that to say this. Sometimes you can be too much to be used by God. You can have too much to be used by God. You can think you know too much to be used by God. Sometimes the less you have, the better you can be used by God. He called Jeremiah by his own choosing. I'm telling you, God can call who he wants to call, but not only that, he can use who he wants to use, however he wants to use them. I really don't have time to explain to you in a very detailed way, but God does not consider and God is not concerned about the plans you have for your own life, because he might have a greater call on your life. In other words, Peter, James, and John were fishermen by trade. But God did not regard that as anything that he was going to consider when he called them. And God did not consider their vocation more important than his call. I wish I had time to explain that to you, and you got to really understand the weight of that. In other words, you can say to yourself, Lord, I got a great position that is making a great contribution to society, and people need me where I am. God does not consider that. He's not even interested in that, because he will call you away from that, and sometimes he will call you with that and still use you and consider what he's called to use you to do is greater than what you do in society. I'm trying to explain to you that he will use you when he wants to, how he wants to, and he is not concerned about the plans you already have. The life you've already built, the prestige, the power, the wealth, the influence. Sometimes he'll call you in spite of that, and sometimes he'll call you with that. Yeah, right. So let me give you these 5 points, and I'm going to close, because I'm trying to teach you and to tell you that God has a plan for you specifically. And you might say to me, Pastor, I'm not all of that. Yeah, you are. You might not be the people, but you are the God. You might not think you have anything to offer, but God has a plan for your life. Let me give you this first thing, and I'm going to speed through these. The first thing is, God knows his plans for your life. You don't. And that's some pretty deep stuff. God knows his plans for your life, but you don't. Now, this is God speaking to Jeremiah. Jeremiah didn't know none of what God just told him in verse 5. Jeremiah didn't know that in the womb God knew him. Jeremiah didn't know in the womb God sanctified him. And Jeremiah didn't know that in the womb God had ordained him. Jeremiah was in the dark about all of this. But God knew his plans for Jeremiah. God will keep you in the dark about his plans for your life. God can be already plotting his plan for your life even before you ever get started living out those plans, or those plans manifesting in your life. God knows his plans for your life, but you don't. And I can tell you this, you don't know when God is going to decide to call you in to service. Now, he might call you when you're young, but he might wait until you get 80. Yeah. Ask Moses, ask Caleb. It was until Moses got 80 years old. He was already in Egypt as a young man, serving in the house of Pharaoh. He had the position, he had the power, and he had the influence, and he had access to the people. But it wasn't until 80 years old, on the backside of the desert, that the Lord said, now it's time. You never know when God is going to choose to use you, to execute his plan in your life. It is never too late for God to call you into service. Listen, God knows his plans, but you don't. And my brothers and sisters, it can become very frustrating. Jeremiah became frustrating because he didn't understand God's plans. He did not understand how all of this was going to unfold. Let me give you the second thing. Not only God knows his plans for your life, but you don't. God's plans have considered all of your weaknesses. Because listen, in Jeremiah, verse 6, Jeremiah gonna say, I cannot speak, for I am a youth. Now let me tell you, God has considered all of your weaknesses. And there's a lot of people who like to talk about weaknesses and what they don't have when it comes to being used by God and God's plans. God knows what you don't have. God knows what your weaknesses are. He knows every limitation. He knows every disability. He knows every defect you have. But he chooses to call you anyway. He chooses to use you anyway. It's just about this issue. Everybody that God called and used in the Bible, they came up with a reason why God shouldn't use them. And I guarantee you, you got something. Yeah. You can think of 100 reasons why God shouldn't use you. Jeremiah came up with 2. I can't speak and I'm too young. Yeah. Age and his disability, not being articulate enough to speak. But my brothers and sisters, God will not accept any excuses. Nothing is going to be a reason why God cannot use. I don't care what your limitations are, what your weaknesses are, how old you are, how young you are, how limited you are in some of the things you can't do. Yeah. And my brothers and sisters, if I had time, I'd get happy and explain to you some of the things you can't do is just what you need. Because when you can't do them, that means God's going to do them. Yeah. I wish I had time to explain to you. Whenever you have a deficiency or a defect or a disability, it really gives God an opportunity to demonstrate just how much he's with you, and he shows people that nothing can stop him from using you, and sometimes he gives you limited ability to show out and demonstrate his power. Listen, God has considered all of your weaknesses. You say, I can't speak. You say, I'm too old. I'm too young. You say, I don't have enough. You say, people don't like me. I can give you 100 excuses that we use why God cannot use us or should not use us, or why we shouldn't be a part of God's plan, God's program, God's purpose. But God has considered all of those things. He already told Jeremiah, I formed you, I've sanctified you, and I've ordained you. And that word form is in verse 5 is a deep word. In other words, whatever Jeremiah had, God already knew, and not only did God already know, he put it there. God created him, he formed him, he packaged him. And everything that Jeremiah didn't have, God already knew he didn't have. And so God's plans consider all of your weaknesses, all of your limitations, all of your shortcomings. But listen, that does not keep God from using you. But I love this next one. God has equipped you with unlimited power. He's equipped you already. Not only did he form you and know all of your weaknesses, but God has equipped you with unlimited power. I need to tell somebody, you just don't know how great you are. You don't know how powerful you are. You want to know why you're still standing, you're still here, you still survive. People couldn't stop you, people couldn't get in your way, and you overcame some of the most difficult obstacles. Is because God formed you and he put in you some powerful things. Yeah. Some stuff you didn't know you had until you needed it. Yeah. I've been fascinated with the cars that I own, and there are some things in the toolbox or in the glove compartment I didn't know I needed them until I needed them. Yeah. I didn't know why the Allen wrench was in the glove compartment until I had a flash. Yeah. And then I realized that I needed it, but the manufacturer knew I was going to need it at some point. Yeah. And he knew I was going to need it at some point, and that some point was in a time of crisis when my tire deflated. And when I got ready to change the tire, I couldn't get the little aluminum plate off. And I thought I had a dilemma until I went into the glove box, and the manufacturer knew I was going to go into the glove box because that's what the manual was. And lo and behold, in a little plastic bag, there was an Allen wrench, and what I discovered was the Allen wrench fit the little Allen screw. I didn't know it was in there, but the manufacturer did. Because he put it there, and he knew at some point I was going to need it. And God has put some stuff in you. You don't even know it's in you until the time of crisis. Until you get to your assignment, till you get to your purpose, till you get to the plan that God has for your life, and you will discover that you got more than you thought you had. Do I have any witnesses in here? Some of y'all can testify because you've been through some things and you didn't think you were going to survive and didn't think you were going to make it. And then all of a sudden you looked into the glove box and you discovered you had everything you needed to make it through and beyond this crisis. God has equipped you with unlimited power. Everything you need. Everything you need. God has equipped you with it. And not only has he equipped you with unlimited power, but he has equipped you with unlimited courage. And listen, this is where God says to Jeremiah, don't be afraid of their faces. In other words, God is saying to you, it's going to be scary, but I've given you courage you didn't know you were going to have, and you didn't know you had. God will give you unlimited courage to face some of the most difficult challenges in life. God has equipped you. My brothers and sisters, you are still here because he has equipped you with unlimited. You don't know just how great you are, how much power you have, how resilient you are, how you can face some of the most difficult difficulties in life. And I love this phrase. It's one of my favorite phrases. Not only do I speak it, but I live it and I trust in it. God has put more in you than he'll ever allow to be put on you. He's put more in you than he's ever allowed to be put on you. It'll never crush you. You'll never be destroyed by the weight that's put on you. You'll never be destroyed by the fiery darts that come to you, because God has put power in you. He has put this unlimited power in you. But listen, I got to tell you this, because it's right here in the text. Not only does God know his plans, you don't. Not only has God considered all of your weaknesses, not only has God equipped you with unlimited power, but I love this one. God has touched you with his hand. Because listen, that's what Jeremiah says in verse number 9. Now listen, if you don't get any of the other ones, get this. You can make it. You can be effective. You can carry out God's plans for your life. You can be used and called by God when you understand that God has touched with his hands. And let me tell you, it will be unlimited power. You will never activate the power that he's put in you until you understand that the hand of God is on you, is with you, and he has touched you. Now listen, you don't understand this touch until you understand the hand that's touching you, who has unlimited power. The God that has touched you is the same God that spoke something out of nothing. is the same God that set the sun in the sky that shines 24 hours of the day and never runs out of energy. It's the same God that allows the sun to illuminate the moon at night and allows the stars to stay in their silver socket. It's that God that has that kind of power. That God has touched you with his hand. It's that God who controls the weather in every part of the world. It's that God who has that kind of power. The same God that keeps the universe spinning, the orbits orbiting, is the same God that's touched you with his hand. Isn't that good news? That God has touched you. He has a plan for your life, but Jeremiah says that his hands touched my mouth. What was God going to use? Jeremiah's mouth. He was going to be a spokesman. He was going to be a representative. He was going to be an ambassador. And he needed strength in his mouth. He had already told God, I can't speak. And the place where he thought he was limited, God's hands touched. My brothers and sisters, God's hands will touch an area in your life where you think you cannot be effective and where you're limited. Jeremiah literally understood that the hand of God was on him. He had courage and power because he knew God was with him. That the hand of God was upon him. And my brothers and sisters, it'll make you be able to walk into fiery furnaces when you know the hand of God is with you. You'll be able to go into lions' dens when you know that the hand of God is with you. You'll know that it's all right to be in a storm as long as you got Jesus on the boat. When the hand of God is with you, you'll be able to speak and mountains will be moved. You'll be able to speak and defeat every Goliath that comes in your life when you know that the hand of God is with you. And the hand of God is upon you. And then I ain't got but one more. Because I'm telling you, God has a plan. And as long as God's hands is with you, God's hands is up on you. Now really, I don't have time to explain it to you, but when you think about the hand of God, listen, the hand of God holds you. One hand is under you, the other one is over you. That's what it means to be in his hands. The other one holds you up, but the other one protects you. And when God's hands is under you and over you, you can walk through the fire. You can walk through the flood, and you can deal with difficulties when he got you in his hands, and his hands are under you and over you. Jeremiah understood his hand. That hand. But then this is the last thing that I want you to notice about the plans of God. Not only has God touched you with his hand, but God has set you over. Now I want to close with this one because I want to explain to you that Jeremiah had a specific purpose because God had specific plans. And God is going to explain to him exactly what he was going to use him to do. He is going to give him his assignment. He's going to tell him why I have called you, why I have ordained you, why I sanctified you, why I put you in your mother's womb. God is going to explain to him in great detail exactly what he was doing in the life of Jeremiah. And God's going to explain to him. And he's going to say to him, see in verse 10, I have this day set you over the nations and over the kingdoms. In that specific, God has given him exactly what his purpose and what God has planned for his life. God says, I set you. And my brothers and sisters, the assignment was not easy. Now, my brothers and sisters, that's why most people don't really understand. They really ain't serving God. How do I know? And how can I make such a provocative and controversial statement? I know you're not serving God because it's too easy. Things come to you too easy. Everything is prosperity. Everything is health and wealth. You can name it and claim it. You can speak it and it come to pass. Everything is pleasant in your life. But when you come to your place of purpose to carry out God's plans, it's not easy. It's going to be hard to do. And you're going to run into roadblocks, bumps in the road, and setbacks. Because look at what God told Jeremiah. I'm going to call you to root up, to pull down, to destroy, to throw down. Now that's the bad part. It's not easy. And listen, I'm telling you, my brothers and sisters, what God calls us to do, it is not easy. It's not pleasant. It's not going to be where we're happy, shouting, celebrating, and wishing. Sometimes we're going to be like David. Oh, if I had wings of a dove, I'd fly away somewhere and be at rest. Sometimes it's going to be difficult. Sometimes it's going to be painful. Sometimes it's going to be lonely. Sometimes it's going to be very unfulfilling. Sometimes you're going to have to cry. Sometimes you're going to be set back with disappointments. Sometimes you're going to be up all night long. Sometimes the weight of it is going to make you feel like throwing in the towel. Sometimes you're going to say, is it all worth it? And the song says, but I feel like pressing my way. Sometimes through the storm, and sometimes through the rain, I feel like pressing. Boy, it ain't easy down here. Oh, I tell you, another one of my favorite quotes, and I'm closing with this one. And I live by this as my core philosophy. My brothers and sisters, I don't get tired of the journey, but I sure know get tired on it. I get weary. It gets hard. The nights seem long. The burden seems heavy. But I feel like pressing my way. And I'm going to tell you, I think I'm going to hold out to see what the end going to be. I'm going to hold out for 3 reasons. I'm going to hold out first because he called. I'm going to hold out secondly because he might be preparing me for what has not yet happened in my life. And thirdly, I'm going to hold out because one of these days I want to hear him say, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I want to hear him say, well done, my good and faithful servant. My brothers and sisters, God has a plan for your life. And I know it seems difficult. It seems hard. But let me tell you, he says in Jeremiah 29, I know my plans that I have for you. And they are good plans and not evil. And God has a plan for your life, every head bowed and every eye closed. My brothers and sisters, God has a